Okay, welcome to Notes for Thursday. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go through right triangle trig with story problems. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do an example of a right triangle problem without the story attached to it yet. And so you're going to be given a right triangle, and you're going to be given information on this triangle. J, K, L, I want to find little k, and the angle is given as 48 degrees. So they're going to give you information. They're going to say find side k. So the first step in doing these is you need to label the sides that you're given with opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So the angle I'm given is 48 degrees. If you want to find the angle up here, you can. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm going to use the angle that's given. Now across from the angle is the opposite. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse, and the third side is adjacent. Because the opposite side does not have any numbers by it, I'm going to cross off the O. And so after I label the sides with opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, what I need to do is I need to figure out what trig ratio uses the two sides I'm left with. And it's always going to be sine, cosine, or tangent for these. You are not going to be doing secant, cosecant, or cotangent. So, if we look at this, I have adjacent and hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So now, after you figure out which one it is, then you write the trig ratio, filling in the numbers that you're given. So whatever numbers were given, in this case, the 48 is our angle, so that goes next. It equals adjacent, which is 12, over hypotenuse, which we do not know, that's our k. And then to solve these, you are always going to cross multiply and divide. And it all depends upon where the variable is found as to whether or not I'm multiplying or dividing. I always put the trig over 1, and then you multiply the two numbers that are diagonally across, so that I have 1 times 12, and I divide by the term that's across from the variable, so I'm going to divide by cosine of 48. Now be careful when you do this, that you don't forget the cosine. You need the cosine, you have to type it in, and you also have to make sure that your calculator's in degree mode. Because if it is not in degree mode, it will not come up correct. And so if you type it in, 12 divided by cosine of 48, you should get an answer of 17.9. And I would like you to round to the nearest tenth if you have to. So we'd round to 17.9. So that's if I have a right triangle and I'm solving for a missing side. Now the second thing that we're going to be asked to do in this assignment is solve for story problems. So the next thing I want to do is work through an example of a story problem, but in order to do that I need to actually write the story problem. So our example 2 is we have a story problem about a ski slope, and it says the chairlift at a ski resort rises at an angle of 20 degrees, 20.75 degrees, and attains the maximum vertical height 12,000 feet, find how far the ski lift travels up the side of the mountain. So there we have our problem that we're going to solve. Now, before we can solve this, the first thing we need to think about or talk about is anytime we're talking about story problems, we have two different angles that could come up in the problems, and that's they could talk about an angle of elevation. An angle of elevation is when I'm on the bottom looking up. This angle here represents the angle of elevation. The other angle that they could talk about is if I'm on the top of the building, and for safety's sake we should probably have a railing up here. If you're on the top of the building looking down at someone who's on the ground, then the angle that we're talking about is here, and this is called the angle of depression. Now, what's true is because these two angles, these two lines, are parallel, the angle of elevation will always equal the angle of depression. So no matter if they tell you you have an angle of elevation or an angle of depression, you can always put your angle number in that lower right-hand or left-hand corner depending upon how you draw your triangle. So anytime we're doing story problems, the first step in a story problem is you're going to draw a right triangle. Now, please do not assume you need to make this drawing elaborate. I do not expect you to make it elaborate. All I expect is you're going to draw a right triangle, and on that right triangle, after you've drawn it, is you're going to put the information that we were given. So in other words, we were given an angle of 20.75 degrees. We were given a vertical height of 1,200, and then we're trying to find out how much the ski lift travels up the mountain. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the numbers on. The angle goes in this lower corner. The vertical side of the triangle, because it says it's vertical height, goes here. And then I need to think about which direction would make sense for the variable because we're traveling up the mountain. Well, if you think about it, you don't travel up a mountain here, so this is where our variable has to go. And just like the other problem now, your third step is to figure out what two sides do we have. And after we do that, what trig ratio uses those sides? So in this case, the two sides are across from this angle is opposite, across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. We're using opposite and hypotenuse, which is sine, and so we're going to do the sine of 20.75, and it's opposite, which is 1,200, over hypotenuse, which is x, and then you cross multiply and divide. So after you set it up, you're going to solve it. So in this case, we're still going to multiply and then divide by the trig, so we'd have 1,200 divided by sine of 20.75. And then you type it in on your calculator again, remembering to keep your calculator in degree mode, otherwise you will get a wrong answer if it's in any other mode. So calculating this, you should get 3,387, and it's 0.0 for one decimal place. It was 0.045, which would round to 0.0, and then we label it. The label on our distance up above was feet, so we labeled this feet, and you should be labeling any of the story problems. So hopefully this helps with doing the story problems. The assignment that you're going to have is on page 302, numbers 10 through 15, 25, 26, 27, and 31. See you tomorrow.